Has this ever happened to you? You're playing a game, and during the course of whatever adventure you're having, you pick up a rare, limited quantity item that you can't farm or buy in a shop, but is incredibly useful. It could be a special potion in Baldur's Gate 3 that gives you all your spell slots back, precious rare ammo for the ultra-powerful Magnum in Resident Evil, or even something as simple as a Master Ball in Pokemon. What matters is that it's powerful, and once you've used it, it's gone forever. Two qualities that mean if you are anything like me, you never actually end up using these items at all. You are constantly saving them for later or for just the right time, and then suddenly you're at the end of the game and you've got 99 mega elixirs in your backpack that you never even bothered to use, and you feel like an idiot. Now, don't get me wrong, me pointing out this issue of an item being too awesome to use isn't exactly a unique observation or even a particularly new problem in games. There are videos and webcomics and forum posts dating back to like the Bush presidency complaining about this exact topic. But I think the one thing that hasn't been pointed out when it comes to saving it for later items, and the thing that makes it interesting to begin with, is that it's a game design and human psychology problem that stems not from us being bad at something, but from us being too good at optimization. Now, the idea that human brains are in any way suited to optimization isn't the first thing you'd think about when you look at, say, my nightmarish spaghetti network of conveyor belts that make up my horribly designed Factorio base, but it's true. The human brain is hardwired to think in terms of efficiency and optimization, and to encourage these kinds of thought processes. The very instincts that compelled your Neolithic ancestors to conserve food for the winter and plant edible seeds in the spring so they can be harvested later are the exact same mental pathways and reward mechanisms that make going from slowly gathering iron by hand to planning out and constructing a massive, fully automated mining, smelting and crafting production line feel so good. And they're also responsible for getting you to take nearly lethal shortcuts by jumping off buildings, and why the first thing everyone did in Skyrim was hoover up all the random tat lying around the Helgen barracks just in case these beer mugs come in handy later. Doing this stuff feels good, not necessarily because it's massively useful, it feels good because it's efficient, and humans have evolved over millions of years to be constantly looking for new things to optimize, even when we don't realize it. Unfortunately, this psychological predisposition towards efficiency doesn't always lead to enjoyable experiences, and in many cases, without really realizing it, we can ruin our time with games in an attempt to play them in the most efficient way possible, like how our need to get money or level up as fast as possible often results in us mindlessly grinding out the same efficient but boring strategy over and over again, usually resulting in us burning out and giving up on a game entirely long before we reach the goal we were aiming for in the first place. Equally, in almost any game with a stealth takedown insta-kill, it's basically the only attack you ever need, and you end up spamming it constantly on every enemy instead of actually fighting them and having fun. And yes, a psychological need for efficient use of resources is why you feel compelled to save all those precious items just in case you need them later, even if later never actually comes. Figuring out these things might feel good in the moment, but in the long run, our subconscious need to seek out efficiencies often causes more problems than it solves, as we end up ignoring vast swathes of games that would otherwise be fun, but simply aren't practical, and trapping ourselves in boring, monotonous gameplay patterns that we hate, but can never quite bring ourselves to abandon. As Soren Johnson, lead designer on Civ 4, Old World and Off-World Trading Company says in one of the most over-quoted game design observations of all time, given the opportunity, players will optimize the fun out of a game. This is where game designers and we as players have to navigate through a difficult balancing act. On one hand, we inherently enjoy optimizing things, whether that's just finding the quickest path from place to place or managing a whole interstellar production chain. And this instinctive behavior is what draws us to and keeps us engaging with some of the best, cleverest mechanics in some of our favorite games. But on the other, our need to optimize is almost impossible to fully satisfy, and it can have some incredibly destructive effects on the way we end up playing particular games. For a long time, I thought it was impossible to balance these two factors. Our need to optimize will always win out over our desire to have fun. But it was in wasting 100 hours of my life playing Factorio that I actually began to see this problem from a different direction. Sometimes, we get so blinded by the optimization conundrum in front of us that we struggle to see the bigger picture, and it's games that can leverage our psychological quirks to their advantage, rather than trying to fight them, that are often the most successful, even if that success can never last forever. What do I mean by that? Well, I'll get to it in a bit. First, we need to lay some groundwork. One of the most important things to keep in mind when talking about our instinctual need to optimize is that developers use it to their advantage all the time to steer us towards fun gameplay. By tempting us with more of a thing we want, or a chance to save on a thing that's precious, games cause us to unconsciously gravitate towards particular playstyles. For example, a bunch of games encourage us to engage with more skillful or interesting play, not by telling us to, or even by directly rewarding us for doing it, but simply by making those techniques more efficient. Going for tricky, more damaging headshots to save on ammo ratchets up the tension efficient in a survival horror game. Shortcuts and using boosts in a racer will get you around the track faster, but is more dangerous and thus more fun. And the best way to get more resources in a strategy game is to expand towards other players rather than just turtling up in your home territory. Of course, Factorio does the same thing. Sure, while you can technically get pretty far through the game only gathering resources by hand and crafting in your inventory, it's way less slow in the long run to actually plan a factory and start playing the game for real, with the added upside that it's much more fun too. All these games use efficiency to subtly guide us towards a particular playstyle, but that's only scratching the surface. Far from pushing us to have more fun by making certain strategies optimal, games can even change how we play and how we think about them by changing our mental calculations for what constitutes efficient use of important resources. Look at a lot of first-person shooter titles, for example, and specifically our relationship with health. In old-school boomer shooters where health is completely finite, we're naturally pressured into strategically avoiding fights while scouring the map for secret hidden health kits because it's all too easy to get gradually whittled down. In more modern console shooters with regenerating health, we now have an infinite surplus, so there's no need to avoid fights, but they also heavily incentivize staying in cover to pull bullets at your face when you get shot, rather than fighting out in the open. And in super intense titles like the new Doom games, Ultra Kill or RoboQuest, where there's loads of healing up for grabs, but the best/only way to get it is to be right up close to enemies when they die, you're pushed into fighting very aggressively because cowardly play means missing out on precious health. A lot of these games are very mechanically similar, and in all of these different kinds of games, health represents more or less the same thing, but by changing whether that crucial resource is in shortage or surplus, and by changing how we get it, optimal gameplay shifts around that axis. Frostpunk 2 also exploits this phenomenon in a pretty interesting way. With each new chapter of the game, the objective you're working towards and the problems you're trying to solve shift, changing the optimizational paradigm around themselves. What this means is that at the start of the game, things might be about stretching your limited coal reserves as far as they can go and trying to retain heat, but later on, heat will be easy to manage and you'll have massive fuel surpluses, and so instead you'll be tasked with trying to figure out how to grow your population and expand, or how to extract a bunch of resources as quickly as possible, regardless of how many of your citizens might die in the process. All serving to get you to play the game in different ways as resource availability fluctuates, helping to keep the game icy fresh. Unfortunately, this kind of design is a bit of a double-edged sword. As you might imagine, our pursuit of efficiency can often lead us to entrench ourselves in patterns of play that aren't fun, but are difficult to escape from because we're chasing those feel-good reward chemicals. A really good example of this is in any game that asks you to care about managing limited combat resources, but also gives you a slow, weak, but unlimited use backup weapon like Mega Man's default gun, or any melee weapon in Immersive Sim, or bombs in Breath of the Wild. These things sit in your inventory, whispering dark promises of infinite efficiency to you, and as a result, you often end up overusing them and ignoring all the actually fun weapons that cost you something to use, no matter how boring plinking away at enemies may be. It took outright removing the infinite ammo pistol in Doom 2016 from Doom Eternal to get people to start playing that game right. Another time this happens is in any game with inventory management or carrying capacity. Invariably, how much stuff you can lug around will become the single most important resource in the game, because the implicit efficiency of being able to carry more stuff at once and not have to worry about leaving things behind feels paradoxically more important than actually having fun with the game. Recently, in Stalker 2, I spent 20 agonizingly boring minutes trudging fully encumbered back to a town to sell my loot, because otherwise I wouldn't have been making use of my backpack space. And what did I spend my ill-gotten gains on, I hear you ask? Why, extra carrying capacity, of course, so I could do something I actively bored myself with even more efficiently next time, because I am stupid and my brain doesn't work properly. This is why it's so critical for games to lean into our optimizational imperative rather than trying to fight it. We will naturally try and make maximal use of our resources, so games may as well try to make the best strategies actually fun. To go back to survival horror games for a moment, players are basically always going to hoard ammo and healing, and that's why Resident Evil wisely adds a little Tetris game for us to play in all of its best entries, not only to make hoarding a bit harder, but also to make it more involved as well, requiring us to plan for the future and make some interesting decisions as well. And in RPGs, players are gonna grind no matter what, so trying to discourage it outright will never work. Instead, RPGs are better served by giving EXP bonuses to fighting high-level enemies and penalising EXP payouts from weaker ones, ensuring players are, at the very least, gonna have fun and be challenged in the process. The problem with us finding what feels like an efficient strategy and bedding down in it, which will always happen eventually, goes beyond tricking ourselves into doing something boring. It also takes away the fun of optimizing things in the first place. Many 4X and city builder games run into this issue. They're great fun as you build up a little empire and capitalize on the available resources as you optimize towards a particular victory condition, but once you've figured out what that is, and you just need to actually win, whether that's by converting everyone to your culture, or terraforming a planet, or building a bunch of magic space obelisks or whatever, suddenly the fun disappears, because there's nothing more to do except dutifully implement what you've already determined is the optimal solution, and it quickly becomes super dull. However, when games make it difficult for us to entirely figure out how to optimize them, they can delay this state for a very long time. Roguelikes, or in fact any games with a lot of randomization, are a great example of this. The fact that you never have a consistent toolkit ensures that you can't latch onto a single strategy, and so you need to re-solve the game's central optimization problem every time. In Reuse 2, a game that sees you controlling big giants and having to construct a nice world for your people by leveraging the synergies between animals, plants, and rocks, you can't do the same mathematically correct thing every time because you get a different selection of toys to play with in every game, ensuring that you have to think on your feet and keeping the game fresh for much longer. That said, this technique can only delay the inevitable for so long. You don't have to see every permutation of every Joker combination in Balatro to figure out that doubling down on a single hand type early and prioritizing multiplicative cards is nearly always a winning strat, and from there, the game starts to become less interesting and much more about just restarting until you get the Jokers and tarot cards you know are most likely to lead to a win, rather than you playing for fun. It's almost as if our definition of optimization is actually pretty flexible and will always wriggle out of whatever limitations we try to impose upon it. And, well, that's not too far from the truth. While throughout this video I've been using the words optimization and efficiency as if they had fixed definitions, as you may have already worked out, they really don't. So much of what it means to optimize something is ultimately down to perspective, down to what subjective value we give particular things. The reason why shooters can change the way we play so effectively by messing with health is because health is what determines whether we win or lose, and that's very important to us. And the thing that gets us to butcher people and turn their skin into sofas in RimWorld is because I care more about money to buy drugs than I do about the stupid Geneva Conventions. What this means is that while games can get us to play in particular ways through their systems balance, it's often far more important to get us to look at their implicit optimizational problems through a particular lens, teaching us to value things that will make the game more fun and putting less emphasis on the things that don't. A classic example of games doing this wrong can be seen in the save it for later ites I mentioned right at the start. The perception that these powerful items are so rare and so precious that we can never use them feels rational and triggers all those chemical reward mechanisms, but often ends up just pushing you into a very conservative, risk-averse playstyle. Fallout 4, for instance, spends a load of time telling you that power armor is precious and that the fusion cores that fuel it are very valuable, and so I basically never used power armor at all, and I missed out on the fun that this mechanical gimmick was promising in the first place. Weirdly, by hyping up these powerful resources less, games can often get us to use them more. Slay the Spire very cleverly leans into the disposability of its potions by only letting you carry 3 of them at a time, encouraging you to use them proactively in spite of the fact that they can be battle-winningly powerful. In so many cases of us over-optimizing the fun out of games, the fault isn't with their balance, but the way they teach us to perceive them. All too often, we've not actually plumbed the depths of a game, nor have we found the best way to play. We've just been conditioned into thinking that it's not efficient, or not worth our while, to look any further. That's why it falls to games to occasionally give us a kick up the backside and force us to re-examine the way we perceive their systems, opening up new optimizational problems in the process. A particularly interesting example of this can be found in FromSoft games. Famously, the limited use weapon buff items in these games almost never get used, because you don't want to waste them on a boss you don't know how to fight, but by the time you can beat said boss, you don't really need them and you're better off saving them for the next one, ensuring that you never really feel like there's a right time to use them. Lies of P elegantly fixes this problem by letting you use 1 weapon buff per respawn, just like a Soulsy healing item. In Lies of P, these items are no less powerful, if anything they're a bit more powerful, but simply by making them seem more available, even if they actually aren't, I ended up using them much more often and had much more fun as a result. Speedrunning and score chasing games too can totally invert our decision making process and can cause us to play familiar genres in totally new ways. By changing what it means to win from simply surviving to going fast or racking up loads of points, they change our perception of optimal play. Rushing as fast as you can and taking deliberately difficult shots in a shooter is rarely optimal, but in Neon White or I Am Your Beast, it's how you win, and so they play totally differently despite having many of the same tropes. Equally, in Spectacle Fighters, optimal play is less about using the right moves to kill enemies efficiently, and more about doing so in the most flashy, point-generating way possible, which encourages playing in a vastly different way compared to other similar titles that don't have this point-scoring incentive to weight how we perceive their optimization dynamics. I'd also be remiss not to mention that Factorio does this as well with its new expansion. While you might think you've basically figured out the game once you build your first spaceship, each new location precipitates a dramatic change in the rules, which forces you to relearn the whole game as the criteria for optimal play change. On space stations, for example, you no longer have infinite, room. and so you need to build an entire factory that harvests asteroids, sorts them, and processes them all on a teeny tiny canvas. Oh, and if your space station runs out of the fuel or bullets that it's supposed to make, it's probably going to get obliterated by one of those same asteroids, so good luck. The planets all work the same way too. On Fulgora, the only raw resource is scrap that you have to use a recycler to turn back into usable materials, and you have to balance your usage of each kind else your recyclers will back up and they'll totally brick your factory. Vulcanus has you fiddling around with complicated fluid mechanics and trying not to piss off these massive worms, and on Glebber, all of your resources rot over time, so you can't rely on having surpluses lying around in chests or leaving your materials on belts, ensuring you can't use the same tried and tested designs and have to refigure out the optimal way to build the rocket to get back home. Of course, rather than giving us new kinds of challenges, games can also revitalize their optimizational paradigms by incentivizing experimentation and exploration themselves. Hades does this in a very simple way. Every run, a random weapon will be given the Dark Thirst, which gives you a huge buff to the amount of meta progression resources you get. Suddenly, it's strictly optimal to take a chance on a weapon you might not be familiar with, encouraging a much more diverse, much more adventurous playstyle. Metaphor ReFantasio also fixes this problem in a slightly more involved way. It has a very fun class system that sees each character swapping between various archetypes, each with their own skills, passives, and importantly, EXP tracks. This allows the game to neatly sidestep an issue that many other RPGs face, where it's quite easy to settle into a balanced, boring, generic party setup long before the game is over. In Metaphor though, because you naturally want to access the most powerful endgame classes, each of which require you to fully level up other weaker ones, the game can guarantee that you won't settle into a single de facto best team lineup, because while that might be good in a single fight, relying on it long term will mean missing out on archetype experience and thus more power further down the line. Unless, that is, you realise you can just sort of stand at one of these crystals and farm skeletons forever for infinite, very slow, very boring archetype XP. Great. Yeah. This brings me to the crux of this particular issue. No matter what tricks game designers pull out to push us in the direction of fun gameplay, or preserve the enjoyment of us optimizing our way out of problems, there is only so much they can do to fight the inexorable entropy of our brains. Eventually, we will find a boring, optimized approach to a game that sucks all the fun out, whether that's by exploiting some weakness in the systems, or just us refining all the enjoyable edges off of something that we once enjoyed doing. And this is because, when you get right down to it, the scope of any gaming optimization problem always stretches beyond the game itself. Our free time, our wallets, and most importantly our need to win are all factors that outweigh any in-game concerns and warp all calculations around themselves. Really, this state of mind is basically what grinding is. It happens when we've boiled down a game to its essentials to such a degree that all it becomes is an objective and the most efficient way to reach it, which is always to leverage factors from outside the game. It doesn't matter if you're mass-producing daggers as the Dovahkiin to level up your blacksmithing because it's the lowest effort way to max out the skill, or farming infinite lives in a platformer because you can't bear getting a game over. Grinding is the ultimate end state of all optimization, no matter how fun a game may have been. Even when games are well designed and have fun, rewarding resource management elements, we can still end up ruining them because real life gets in the way. Dishonored and Deus Ex Human Revolution, two immersive sims, both encourage aggressive use of your special powers. In Dishonored, a portion of your mana refills over time after you use a spell, and in Deus Ex, your final energy cell slowly recharges on its own. This is good player-facing design, but unfortunately, it crumbles in the face of the realization that the time of the average gamer is worthless, and the optimal way to play is to always wait around for them to recharge and never actually bother spending any resources. In the same vein, something like World of Warcraft has been refined over 2 decades to really push players towards all the fun questing and dungeon content instead of making them kill boars in Elwyn Forest over and over to level up. And yet, for experienced players, the game still feels grindy because deep down we know we're not hanging out with these dumb dragons because we want to, we're doing it because helping them out is the most efficient EXP source in the game. And as a result, it doesn't matter how good the quests are, many of us are too jaded and optimization pilled to ever appreciate them. This gets even worse when you consider metatextual forms of optimization. It's so much more efficient to not bother solving a game yourself at all because you could just look up a walkthrough instead and instantly know the best way to play. And by reloading or resetting the game when anything goes wrong, you're completely optimizing risk out of the equation and guaranteeing the best RNG results. All it costs is way too much time and any semblance of fun. These forms of optimization speed us past all the fun bits of the process, but to our broken brains, they seem too efficient to turn down, and without some real self-control, we can ruin games constantly as a result. Many games even take advantage of this for decidedly unethical aims. Guess what's really efficient in terms of time, difficulty, and effort? Buying in-game things with real money, to avoid having to play it at all. Doing this even triggers a little reward mechanism in your brain, like paying to win solves some sort of problem in a clever way, making it that much harder to resist next time. I guess this is all a way of saying that our need to optimize is a fundamental part of our psychology, and our psychology is far from perfect. Our optimizational instinct is short-sighted, easy to manipulate, and it definitely doesn't know when to stop. But that's not to say that we're doomed to make ourselves miserable or to be puppeteered around by the makers of gacha games until the end of time. While our need to optimize can never truly be conquered, as all the great games that use it to their advantage show, it can be put to good use. All we need to do is stop optimizing for a myopic concept of winning or having the most stuff, and instead, we need to start optimizing in pursuit of fun. And I think it's this very thinking that explains why I like and appreciate Factorio so damn much. Rather than trying and failing to wrangle my brain into playing it in a particular way, or exploiting my psychology to its advantage, Factorio simply lets us off the leash to optimize as much as we want in whatever direction takes our interest, confident that it's deep enough and complex enough that we'll always find new things to do and better ways to do them. Even once you've beaten the 100+ hour campaign, you could still build your factory totally differently and much more efficiently next time, or try speedrunning the game, or even try going for the lazy achievement which requires automating as much as possible. And throughout it all, Factorio never pressures you into needing to do it the best and simply encourages you to chase your own definition of optimization, and I think that's the real lesson to take away from the game. Sometimes, it takes defining optimization for ourselves to stop it from defining how we play. Sure, looking up a guide for the best build that totally trivializes Elden Ring will make you beat it faster, but it's also way less fun than doing it yourself. Coming up with a boring strategy that involves pressing one button over and over might be easier than something more involved, but it's sure as hell less fun too. And while there's a whole host of psychological incentives to get trapped in the infinite efficiency-chasing whirlpool of daily quests, double XP weekends, and battle pass grinds, sometimes it can be worth it to just take a step back and ask yourself if this over-optimization is actually going to be worth your while in the end. Take it from me, it's usually not. The fact that our brains are so powerful and have so many idiosyncrasies is what makes video games such an enjoyable and rewarding way to spend our time. But with that incredible potential comes the possibility that our brains can sometimes run away from us. Without an awareness of what we're doing and why, it's all too easy for us to end up following the psychological path of least resistance and end up worse off as a result. Our need to chase optimization and efficiency are at the heart of some of the greatest video games ever. But without keeping an eye on exactly this instinct, it's possible to ruin them forever. And so, it's always worth keeping mind of whether what we're doing is the most efficient way that we could be enjoying ourselves. Which is to say, hanging out with your friends or going outside seem like they might be efficient ways to spend your time, but have you considered that's 4 or 5 hours that you could be spending fiddling with inserters and splitters to get an extra 5% throughput on your jelly factory? Yeah, bet you didn't consider that, did you? Idiot. Well, hello and welcome to this, the After the Video segment. Come on in, mind the mess, it's getting a little bit hectic as we ramp up to the holidays, but I have just managed to cobble together this video while compiling my list for the best games of the year. There's been a lot, hasn't there? Wow. Anyway, this part of the video is where you all sit down and we have a little chat about some things that are much more worthy of your time and attention than little old me. Specifically, a YouTube person and some lovely people who all share a certain thing in common. See if you can guess what it is. First up, I want to recommend the channel and the YouTuber Sputnik34, a video essay person I've had my eyes on for a little while now and who has really come into his own in the past year or so. The thing that I think really makes Sputnik's videos stand out is his utter fearlessness to go against the grain and take an absolute wrecking ball to some pretty well established topics. Whether that's showcasing how Dark Souls has increasingly lost its edge, or how Starfield has some redeeming elements, or the correct position that Dungeons & Dragons combat is terrible, Sputnik has managed to change my mind on more than a few things, and he does it while being pretty damn funny to boot. Sputnik's also got a bunch of stuff on indie horror games that I hadn't even heard of until he talked about them, so there's loads of stuff to take a look at. Please do go check him out. Of course, there are some other people you should be checking out too, and those people are my lovely patrons. Genuinely, it is insane how much money I leave on the table by not taking money from big companies, because I think it damages the videos and my creative integrity. And the only thing that gives me the financial leeway to do that is the continued support of all the people on my Patreon. Sure, patrons get early access to videos, behind the scenes content, and some extra bonus talking points that didn't make it into the video, but I think the real benefit of supporting the channel is ensuring that I'm not forced into shilling for Raid Shadow Legends just to put food on the table, and for that, I am forever grateful. And if you want to go that extra mile and give me more money than I could ever reasonably ask of you, I'll even put you on a special list of my mysterious benefactors alongside these fine people, who are Ali Wright, Andrew Labrano, Auna94, Bobby, Bodybuilding Baby Balbon, Brian Natariani, Brian Yes Tariani, great, Constantine Amend, Cosmix360, Daniel Mentjes, Dirk Jan Karambeld, Digleteer, Dis Ellie, Ecton, Edward Franklin Woods, Edwina the Space Bun, Eric Woolston, Eugene Bulkin, Furious Hulk, Gaskell, Grandpa Mocker, Heckett's Noah, Jacob Dylan Riddle, Jinkaloid, Kevin Help Us, Conlove, Kangi, Luke Kokoran, Macewinder54, Marika Vladilina Altair, Mark Vallant, May Contain Fox-like Substance, Michael C., Mike, Oxlong, deliberate pause there, Nate Graff, Oliver Marhofer, Patrick Romberg, Peter Tomasic, Reddit Regal Regex, Ray's Dad, Silver Forfey, Steam Rollerman, Steve Riley, Tyler Duncan, Uprising, Von Boomslang, Whimsical Wisp, Zach Brandmeyer, and Chow. Okay, that's it, that's all. Stay tuned during the big holiday rush for some cool stuff, and I'll see you around. Bye!